Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to discuss everything that you need to know before playing Death Guard. I'm joined by Alfred Farius. Alfred, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Good, good. So let's jump straight in terms of the abilities that Death Guard have. So the first one on the list is Plague Weapons. Reroll ones to wounds, essentially. And this is super powerful all the time. However, it becomes particularly good with Arch Contaminator, which we see quite a lot as a Warlord trait. It's very popular, which is reroll all wounds when you're in combat or when you're in very close range when shooting.
And it's probably key to note that one of Mortarion's many Warlord traits is Arch Contaminator, and you see Mortarion quite a lot, so you'll definitely see this come up.
Yeah. So the second thing is something to be aware of, but not massive, which is that Death Guard ignore the rules for modifying combat attrition tests, so they're not so likely to run away. So they also have Malicious Volleys, which is basically exactly the same as Bolter Discipline for Space Marines. It's also worth noting that this stacks incredibly well with Inexorable Advance, which allows units to count as standing still as long as they didn't fall back or advance, and it also means that vehicles can shoot at units within engagement range, but they don't suffer the penalty to heavy weapons, so definitely one to watch out for. Okay, so let's talk about the big one then, which is Disgustingly Resilient. So if your plan to take on Death Guard or 40k was to spam loads of heavy bolters or 2 damage weaponry, you may want to rethink that strategy because you've just lost a lot of efficiency.
Cries in Imperial Fists.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, it's worth noting though that not everything has Disgustingly Resilient in the book. So if your opponent does have anything without it, you can ask your opponent, then you can actually maybe gain a bit more efficiency by shooting into those units. And the final thing to mention is the Contagions of Nurgle ability. So this is actually not an aura, which is probably the first thing to mention because there are a bunch of things now that turn off auras, and this doesn't count as one. So units within 1 inch in turn 1, 3 inches in turn 2, 6 inches in turn 3, and 9 inches in turn 4 and 5 are -1 toughness. And you can also extend these ranges through multiple ways, I should say. And what this means is that if you're Eldar, for example, you're going to be wounded on 2s a lot of the time.
I was just going to say, with the contagion abilities, it's definitely worth keeping those ranges in mind. Essentially, with Death Guard, you want to stay back. You want to be out of that contagion range because not only will you be safer and your toughness will be higher, but also a lot of their things, like Arch Contaminator, only work within 12 inches. So just stay back and shoot as much as possible before they get in there.
Absolutely. And before we move on to the data sheets, I actually just wanted to cover the psychic powers. There's a few to be really aware of. So the first is kind of one that's from 8th edition, still the same, which is Miasma of Pestilence. This is something that is going to come up a lot if they've got a big, tough unit, they've got the Mortarion.
It'll almost always be Mortarion that gets it, for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, the other one that's amazing with, especially with Mortarion, because he has one of those abilities that, as I mentioned, can extend the contagion range, is Curse of the Leper. Which has a warp value of 6, and you roll 7d6s, and for each die that exceeds your opponent's toughness, they lose a mortal wound.
Yeah, it just stacks so well with that contagion that is -1 toughness.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of mortal wounds. And in fact, we'll see as we go through this book that mortal wounds is something that the Death Guard are pretty good at doing across the board.
So the other psychic power we just wanted to mention was Gift of Plagues. So Gift of Plagues increases the range of your contagion range by 6 inches. And this is super strong, especially when we talk about how you can get other contagions later on. I don't know if there are any other psychic powers you want to talk about, Alfred?
Well, you'll see the others in games, but those are the main ones to be aware of, which might catch you off guard, which I think is the key thing.
Definitely. So yeah, again, in terms of data sheets, so the first thing I just wanted to mention was Typhus. They have quite a few ways of doing mortal wounds in this book, and Typhus has his own. So not only does he have access to those psychic powers and smite for mortal wounds, but he can also, in your command phase, do additional mortal wounds for being host of the Destroyer Hive, which is all the flies around him.
It's definitely better than it used to be.
No, for sure. Which is kind of a general thing, but something you might not be aware of is that all of the characters, even things like your traditional Chaos Lord, as Death Guard, are going to be Toughness 5. That is something they do now have. So yeah, if you have got a meta with lots of Death Guard, look into that Strength 5, Strength 6 weaponry if you have it. And yeah, I just wanted to mention the Lord of Virulence quickly, although we're not going through everything, because he is one of the 2 amazing flamer characters that you have in this book.
And there's a note we should make about that, in that there is a stratagem. It's called Virulent Rounds. You can change bolt weapons by a core unit to be plague weapons, which means that you can have a big unit of bolter marines or a big unit of terminators with their combi bolters, and all of a sudden they count as plague weapons, and so when they're in range of his Master of Destruction aura, unmodified wound rolls will have an extra AP, which is really tasty.
Yeah, so moving on to troops actually now, because I did just want to talk about Plague Marines briefly. The only thing I've noted on my notes is beware. So with Plague Marines, I think this is the main thing to watch out for, is the fact that do not underestimate how good these guys are in combat. As Alfred said, you're going to be wanting to stay back a lot when playing Death Guard, and this is actually one of the reasons. They are devastating in combat, as are the Blightlord Terminators. They have some access to some amazing weapons. With Arch Contaminator, they're going to be rerolling wounds a lot, so really be considerate of that fact.
Yeah, Plague Marines are certainly something you're going to see a lot of. They're a really solid troop choice, difficult to put down. Not only that, but there are several stratagems in the book that will increase their effectiveness both in combat and shooting, depending on what the Death Guard player needs them to do.
100%. And I think it's also worth noting that one of the reasons Plague Marines will be seen a lot is because Poxwalkers can't do actions. Poxwalkers can do one specific Death Guard secondary, but that's it. So do be aware that if you just leave those units alive, Cultists and Poxwalkers, you might be leaving your opponent with nothing to complete their actions with.
For sure.
And now, one, probably reasonably chunky size of this video is going to be covering the elite characters, because this is something Death Guard have in abundance, is amazing characters for elite slots, and they can now take more of them than ever. And so, I thought it would be worth just mentioning the key things they will do, because I think a lot of us who are not Death Guard players just hear words and we're not sure which ones mean which thing.
Even as a Death Guard player, I still get confused from time to time.
Definitely. So the first guy to mention is the Noxious Blightbringer. Now, bearing in mind you can't negatively modify Death Guard movement, having his ability to add 1 to the move characteristic of core units means that actually Death Guard become reasonably quick. The second one, which is probably the one you'll see the most, I would guess, is the Foul Blightspawn. He's pretty similar as he was in 8th edition, if you're familiar. So he still has this incredible flamer. It has changed a bit, but it's still really, really strong. And he also has an ability called Putrefying Stink.
Incredibly strong. So,
which is at the start of the fight phase, select a unit within 3 inches, and that unit cannot fight until after all units have done. And in 9th edition, that means that you also can't pay to interrupt with that unit also. And as Death Guard are, kind of slow, a lot of the time they're going to be expecting to be charged. So they're going to have this guy in amongst Plague Marines, and they're going to want to be able to get him within 3 inches when the Plague Marines are charged, so the Plague Marines can fight first.
There is a big thing that I wanted to add, in that there's a relic called the Revolting Stench Vats, and that changes that 3-inch aura to a 6-inch aura, which makes it much harder for you to get out of that 3-inch range.
Yeah, definitely.
Because essentially that's a 12-inch bubble of fight last. If he's in the middle of, the Death Guard lines, just expect to be hit before you get to hit back.
Super strong. Yeah, so moving on to the Biologus Putrefier. This is the guy with all of the grenades on his back. He kind of looks like he's got wings. And what this guy does is he kind of has a version of Blades of Putrefaction from 8th edition. So what this means is he can select a core unit, which is generally going to be Plague Marines or Terminators. On an unmodified wound roll of a 6, they do a mortal wound.
But bear in mind, this is melee only. This is not shooting, but it's still very, very powerful.
Absolutely. And yeah, he has a couple of other abilities. So he basically helps with grenades, and he does explode also. Something to watch out. Yeah.
Well, in fact, all of these little Death Guard characters can explode with a stratagem.
Let's talk about the Death Guard Apothecary. I mean, Plague Surgeon. Sorry, but he was essentially a Death Guard Apothecary. He can heal wounds, but he also gives a 3-inch bubble of 6s ignore wounds. But am I right in saying he can extend that again?
So there once again is a relic called the Fulgaris Helm, which adds an additional 3-inch to the bearer's aura abilities, which this is. So that would once again make this a 6-inch aura of 6 up field
Yeah,
pains.
brilliant. Yeah. Oh, and I have skipped the Tallyman. Sorry, Mr. Tallyman. He is the Death Guard ability to get back command points. So Death Guard players are often going to be getting 2 command points at the start of each turn, because on 2d6, on a 7+, they get an extra command point at the start of the command phase, and that is most of the time. Then he also can add 1 to hit rolls for a nearby unit. In terms of the Death Guard Terminators, so Blight Lords, just amazing. You know, that's all we're going to say on that. They're just super strong. On Death Shroud, it's just worth mentioning, in terms of gotchas, their ability to be bodyguards. So what this means is that when they've got a character nearby with under 9 wounds, that unit cannot be targeted by ranged attacks.
And I think it's worth noting here as well that a lot of the sniper abilities have been changed where the wording says you could ignore the lookout sir rule, whereas this bodyguard ability, it's not a lookout sir interaction, it's enemy models cannot target that character. So there's even with a Vindicator, you cannot target a character protected by Death Shroud.
No, for sure. That's a good point. And in terms of other things from the book, so a lot of the other stuff in the book that we're going to talk about now, I think, gets buffed from primarily stratagems. So, for example, the Hellbrute, the new Hellbrute ability is the same as the Dreadnought ability, which is -1 damage, which Death Guard already have, and that doesn't stack specifically. However, there are some pretty great strats that you can use on Hellbrutes. For example, they can count each of their damage as spillover damage. So each of their Hellbrute fists, although they're 3 damage, that will be killing 3 guys potentially if they use a stratagem. And there's also a Hellbrute specific stratagem,
Fire Fever.
Fire Fever, which does what? Sorry, Alfred.
So Fire Fever means that as long as it targets 1 unit, you can add 1 to its hits and wound rolls. It's solid for 1 CP.
Yeah, and then the other kind of ones that get particularly buffed are things like Chaos Spawn. There is a specific Chaos Spawn stratagem, isn't that right, Alfred?
Yes, so to give them +1 toughness and gives it the Disgustingly Resilient ability.
Awesome. So before we get to Mortarion, were there any other units you just wanted to mention?
I think the Fetid Bloat Drone is something that you'll definitely see,
Okay,
especially with the Flesh Mowers. So with the Flesh Mowers, it will have, because you make 3 attacks instead of 1, so 4 times 3 is 12 attacks, hitting at strength 7, AP -2, 2 damage, but bear in mind, because of the contagion, whatever it's attacking is going to have -1 toughness. So even though it's strength 7, if you're toughness 8, it'll be wounding you on 4s. And if you're anything less than that, 3s.
Yeah.
Pretty solid.
Amazing. And they have a brilliant stratagem as well, don't they?
That's right. They have a stratagem that lets them heroically intervene 6 inches.
It's incredible. So let's move on then, unless there's anything else you want to mention to Mortarion, because I'm sure a lot of people are concerned about him right now. The first thing to note, I'm sure everybody's aware of, is that Mortarion is incredibly tough. So Mortarion, he's got toughness 8, he can be -1 to hit from this psychic power. He's got the old Disgustingly Resilient, he's got the new Disgustingly Resilient. He has an invulnerable save, a good armor save, and he can also affect things like rerolls and auras. I don't know if there's anything else defensively you wanted to mention for him.
I mean, defensively as well, just the fact that he's toughness 8, it's a point that's it's pretty hard to wound him in the first place, in addition to all these stacking rules. He takes some dedicated firepower to put down.
The big thing with Mortarion is, I would say as well, don't just think with this model that you can just leave him, because he flies. He can ignore terrain. He is fast, and he has psychic powers. He has the lantern is not bad, and which is his gun, I should say. Sorry, and he's okay in combat.
Okay, I think is putting it lightly.
Fair point. Well, I think the reason I say that is because it leads me quite nicely onto my next point, which is that when you're playing against Mortarion, you do have one play, which is to try and tie him up. Admittedly, not everybody can do this, but because he only has 7 attacks, or 21 with the scything, if you have a unit that can reliably take those hits, you can potentially protect the rest of your army. And Mortarion is a pretty excellent transition for us right now, because he has not only 3 Warlord traits that he gets every game, he can also choose 1 Warlord trait. And is this at the start of each game? Or?
It says at the start of the first battle round.
Incredibly strong, because some of them could be gotchas, some of them could genuinely take you by surprise, and some of them, you're probably going to see more than others, being honest. So where did you want to start with the play companies?
The ones that you'll see the most, I think. One of the key ones, and the one that I'll be playing, is Mortarion's Anvil. And so the Contagion ability So we should mention the contagion abilities, as we mentioned before, are the abilities that change with range. Round 1, it's only 1 inch, and then goes to 3, etc. These are what you get as Warlord traits for choosing a particular Plague Company. And this one, each time a model in an enemy unit makes an attack, the hit and wound roll cannot be re-rolled, which is huge if you have that on Mortarion.
It's something to be very scared of.
And he always counts his contagion ability as a longer range.
Yeah, to 9. And they can even get it to 12 through many means. And if they do that, they might want to take the droning also. So the droning halves the movement characteristic, which on one hand might not be effective sometimes, because if you're within 12, you're likely to make a charge anyway. However, if Mortarion goes just to within 12 inches of certain models which have a small move characteristic, even if they have a move characteristic of 5, let's say they move half of that, at that point they've still got to make a reasonably long charge.
It's hard to get away from him, especially with the movement that he's got there as well.
Yeah. So in terms of the other, let's cover the Warlord traits and the Relics now.
The inexorable is pretty good. Improved AP by 1, which if you put Mortarion right in there and you've got a decent gun line at the back, additional AP is always going to be good.
Great point. Yeah, great point. Super strong ability. And yeah, Poxmongers, it's probably just worth mentioning that they can give a 4-up invulnerable to demon engines, so this is going to make them really strong.
Yeah, when this rule first came out, it used to be a bubble of 4-up invuln, which was much stronger, but now it's 1 unit. So because it's still unit, it'll still be probably seen on Mythic Black Haulers, as you say, because they come in units of 3, but you might not see it as much with things like Plague Burst Crawlers.
Let's just move on then. We've mentioned a lot of stratagems as we've gone on, just key combos. Were there any of the stratagems you just wanted you to consider gotchas, things that might really throw people?
Yeah, they have a stratagem called Diseased Effluence, and what that is a Death Guard character, but not a demon. If it's within engagement range at the start of the command phase, and then I roll the d6, and on a 2+, it's 2d3 mortal wounds. So you could, for example, have a Tallyman or a Foul Blight Spawn, and you charge him with your unit because you think, fine, it's just a little character, what's he going to do? Then for 1 CP, the Death Guard character has a potential of doing mortal wounds to you, and that is a lot of mortal wounds.
Yeah, excellent point. I just wanted to mention Haze of Corruption, which I said earlier in conjunction with the Hellbrute, but it actually works with any core unit, and that means that damage from attacks is going to spill over. Was there anything else from you, Alfred, that you wanted to mention?
We might have briefly mentioned this, but there's a stratagem called Flash Outbreak, and what that is it gives all the contagion abilities that you have to a unit. So I think where you're going to see this, it's 2 CP, and people are probably going to put it on something like a Fetid Bloat Drone because they move relatively quickly for Death Guard, 10 inches flying, and then it'll take on the contagion abilities that any of your units have. So if you've chosen one for Mortarion, for example the droning to minus movement, then this Bloat Drone will go up in their lines, have that contagion ability, and it will also count as 1 level higher in battle round for the range. So you'll see that for 2 CP, in addition to the psychic power that we've mentioned a couple times, the Gift of Plagues, to add another 6 inches to that. And then so all of a sudden you've got this 1 unit that they'll throw up in your lines, and it'll either it'll reduce the toughness of a lot of things by 1, in addition to either giving additional AP -1 to the Death Guard army, or might be doing mortal wounds. It depends what they choose as their Plague Company, but it's something that you really need to be aware of because it's a big sort of force multiplier that the Death Guard can do.
For sure. I think other things that are key from my end, I'd consider kind of gotchas. So Poxwalkers can do mortal wounds for 1 CP on 6s. Definitely something to watch out for. They're not, you might just dismiss them. Don't do that necessarily. And then I guess the other big one for me is Cloud of Flies. And this one is kind of the same as 8th edition if you're familiar. It basically means that can be quite expensive on Terminators, but it basically means that they could have an infantry unit that you can't shoot, and this could guarantee them CP. And they activate this at the start of your shooting phase now. So this is a really big deal now. It's a big change because don't put yourself into a position to wipe this unit, deny your opponent 15 points, and then your opponent pays 2 CP and stops you. So watch out for that one.
For sure. One other thing I wanted to mention is sometimes you might think that something like a Rhino is a unit that Death Guard players might have because they're quite slow in general, and you think, oh, once it's got rid of its Plague Marine inside, it's not useful anymore, but actually it still will be because of these contagions. It has those contagion abilities, so just that Rhino being nearby will minus the toughness of your units, and it's just something to be aware of. Like, stay away from all Death Guard units because of these contagions.
It's a great point. Yeah. So in terms of Warlord traits and relics, was there anything that really stood out to you?
I mean, we've mentioned already the ones that increase the range of these aura abilities, because they have so many strong aura abilities in the Death Guard, so those will be ones to look out for. In addition, the Suppurating Plate returns from 8th edition, and if you've not played against that, what it does is it gives the bearer a save characteristic of a 2+, and every time an enemy fights after it makes its attacks, if it's lost any wounds, then on a 2+, the attacking unit suffers a mortal wound. So essentially, it'll probably be on a Demon Prince, you go to attack that Demon Prince, you do a few wounds to it, but then all of a sudden you're getting all these mortal wounds back at you.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Those are the main ones. I mean, with each match, bear in mind, people are only going to take 1 or 2 relics, and personally, I think that the Revolting Stench Vats, not rats, could be rats, but it's vats, is the best one in that increasing the range of that fight last. That's just so strong.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I think we're going to call it there then, guys. So I think we've covered everything we wanted to cover. This video has probably been longer than I originally wanted, but I don't think there was any other way. There is so much incredible power in this book, and I think you need to be aware of everything that we've spoken about today if you're going to take on Death Guard, especially competitively. So, Alfred, anything else to add?
Not really. Follow me at AlfredFarius on Instagram, that's it.
I'll put you in the description. And yeah, do let me know in the comments if there's anything you think we've missed. Also, let me know what you think of the format of this video. It's obviously the first one that we've done of this kind. We're going to keep doing them to cover every faction that has been released and is being released for 9th edition. So thanks very much for watching this video, and happy hobbying.